Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we're going to be talking about consumer finance issues, and especially how to avoid some of those common mistakes that often get people into trouble. My guest today is Aleta Ostlund. Aleta is the owner and broker of Ostlund Insurance Services, and she is also a full-time lecturer in family and consumer sciences. Welcome, Aleta, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, as we begin this conversation, we should start with the gold standard in consumer finance, or the golden rule, if you want to call it that, and that is that people need to make sure that they're not spending more than they're bringing in on a monthly basis.
Correct.
And if they follow that rule, that will avoid a lot of the problems that we're going to talk about in the process here. So how can people put together a monthly budget that takes into account all of their needs and yet still allows them to have some spending money?
Well, I think the first step is actually making a budget and following it on a monthly basis. I don't think most Americans are doing that, and it leads to overspending, like you said. If people sat down and realistically took an inventory of their income and were realistic with their expenses, and also made a net worth statement so they had an idea of what their assets and what their liabilities and debts were, they would be better equipped to spend more responsibly. And if they did have some debt, they would be able to come up with a plan and some goals on how to eliminate that debt and live within their means in a more healthy way.
Okay, well, there are some surveys that have come out recently that don't bode particularly well for the American public and the way we're spending our money. One of the surveys was from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where they asked people if they could come up with $2,000 in an emergency situation, and 33%, or a third of the folks that responded to that survey, said they would not be able to come up with $2,000 even if they used all of their savings, tapped into their credit card, and even borrowed and begged from family and friends. And there are some other surveys that also support that. There was one that was done for Bankrate.com recently, where 59%, almost 6 out of 10 Americans, said they don't even have $500 in savings. Now, we want to be careful here that we don't minimize the financial pain and suffering that a lot of people are going through in today's economy. But having said that,
people are still recovering from what happened just almost 10 years ago.
Exactly. And so how can they straighten things out going forward? What are some things to do?
Again, the most basic elements of financial planning include creating that budget and having an idea of how much money are we working with? How much income do we have? What is, how should our expenses be carried out? By doing a monthly budget and by addressing it for several months in a row, couples can come together and talk about what are our goals, looking at how much we're spending to live. Living expenses, your fixed expenses, including your mortgage or your rent, really shouldn't be more than 70% of your income. And I think in LA County especially, people are spending 100% just to get by, and they may need to make some adjustments with their lifestyle.
Well, let's talk about coastal California, because as we all know, rent is very high here. The cost of buying a home is also very high. Putting aside the idea of the lowest interest rate on a mortgage, because everybody wants to pay the least amount of interest possible, but other than that, how can we save, or how can we stretch that dollar when it comes to paying rent or buying property?
Well, once people do make a budget and are realistic with it and are following it for several months and having full transparency within the household on their spending habits, they really need to look at how much they're spending on rent or on their mortgage. And if it is too much, they may need to make some choices. They may need to either downsize their home. There is a lot of room for creativity with real estate. If they do own their home, they may want to consider renting it out and creating a rental income, and downsizing and buying a smaller home, maybe in a more affordable area of California. They need to possibly move more inland from coastal California, or they may need to look for roommates or look for ways to create more income.
And when we do solve all of these financial problems that have been troubling us, we then go to apply for a loan, and then the dreaded FICO score comes up. So
Yes.
what does the FICO score measure, and what causes it to be less than ideal?
Well, people need to realize that credit is very important, and credit can't be avoided. Some Americans don't have credit established, and that leads to problems as well, because your credit score is directly linked to the cost of money. When people want to buy a home, they need to get a mortgage and they need to apply for a loan. And the interest rate they will qualify for is linked to that FICO score. And what the FICO score is really looking at is a combination of about 5 areas. 30 to 35% of your FICO score is comprised of your credit history and how much debt you have at that moment. And then the other 3 areas are really a combination of what type of debt do you have? Is it all credit cards, or is there a car loan? Is there a student loan? How much credit have you applied for in the last year? You know, you can't keep applying for more and more credit. That actually hurts you. And your credit history, as far as how long have you been using credit? People who are seasoned credit users, that looks better than people that are new to the credit market.
So to summarize some things that you've mentioned, if you apply for too many loans or too many credit cards in a short amount of time, that's going to hurt you.
Yes, and if you are declined for a credit card, you really need to stop applying for any credit for at least 6 months.
And if you're carrying a high balance on several credit cards, that's not good.
No, people don't need to have several credit cards. Really, the rule of thumb is to have no more than 3. 2 credit cards is ideal. In my opinion, people really don't need to have gas station cards or department store cards. A Visa, American Express, a major credit card is essential for emergencies and for traveling.
All right, so let's say that we've gotten ourselves into trouble with
Yes.
our credit cards and our loans and that sort of thing. Okay, and we decide to go to one of these so-called credit fixing companies that you hear advertising on the radio
Yes.
and on television and in
Yes.
newspapers and so on. So what about credit fixing companies? Are they doing anything that we can't do ourselves?
No, and I'm not a fan, because what you just said is absolutely true. These agencies can't eliminate debt. They can try to negotiate with your credit providers, which is something consumers can do on their own. It's a time-consuming process, first of all. They can help you eliminate errors on your credit report. Again, something a consumer can do by sending a letter in. The creditor has 90 days to respond to the letter. So again, it's a time-consuming process. If there are errors on your credit, it's something that you can take care of yourself. And keep in mind that there's usually laws to prevent these credit fixing agencies from charging up front, but most of them do. They will have people sign a contract. They pay $99 on average a month to do something that people can do on their own, or they can seek help through a nonprofit agency. The Federal Trade Commission has credit repair agencies through every city that is a free service for consumers.
So if our FICO score is low, but we happen to have a lot of cash in the bank for one reason or another. Now, usually that's not a combination that you normally see. If
No.
people have a lot of money in the bank, they've usually taken care of their credit issues.
Right,
But let's say it
right.
happens. For example, someone has a long period of unemployment, which causes them to get behind on their bills.
Okay.
Or perhaps they have a medical emergency that was
Sure.
not covered by insurance, or some tragedy befell them which was unforeseen.
right.
Okay, but on the other side of the coin, perhaps they came into a small inheritance.
Okay.
Perhaps they've received a settlement from the insurance company or
Okay.
from a lawsuit that was for something that was not of their own making. Or maybe they just got lucky with a scratcher card from the
Okay.
lotto, which doesn't happen very often or what have you. But does that stash of cash operate as a hedge against a bad FICO score?
If it's documented, if it's deposited in a bank or a credit union. If it's in a coffee can in the kitchen cabinet, no, it's not going to help you. So Americans need to have trust in banks and deposit that stash of cash that you're talking about. And sure, that serves as collateral. That will help somebody's credit score. But that balance part of it should go towards paying down some of those debts.
Okay, and all right, so let's say the stash of cash is off the table or it doesn't exist.
Right.
All right, so now we're talking about bad debt that's going to a collection agency.
Okay.
What happens when bad debt goes to a collection agency? What is the collection agency trying to do, and what's their goal?
Well, the collection agency has been hired usually by a lot of mom and pops. You know, there's neighborhood dentists and doctors and tire stores that provided a service or a product, and their livelihood is depending on collecting the money that's owed to them. So most of these businesses are giving their customers 6 to 9 months to pay back the debt. If they're unsuccessful with that process, they then turn to a collection agency. The collection agency usually then gives the person a good 3 to 6 months before they start marking bad marks with their credit score. Once they do report the person's debt to the credit rating company, they're hoping that that person will not run from the debt, that they will cooperate and try to come up with a payment plan to pay back some, if not all, of the debt. Once that is done, the collection agency will then contact the credit rating company again to remove the debt from the file.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes before we go to the break, but I want to also touch on payday loans and quick cash loans, which are now accepting your auto as collateral, the equity in your auto. Or a paycheck.
Yeah.
What about these?
Not a good deal. I'm not a fan at all. There are several states that have actually ruled them as illegal to operate in their states. The other states that are allowing them to operate are trying to control the APR to be under 40%. But what I think some consumers are not understanding is that they advertise their interest rate on a weekly basis, and if they do not pay back the small loan of, let's say, $100 to $500 in a couple of months, the interest can grow to 500 to 1,000%. So to borrow, let's say, $100 for 1 week, there's a $15 processing fee and, let's say, a 30% interest rate. So to borrow $100 for 1 week, you're looking at a 45% interest rate.
Not a good deal, obviously.
Not a good deal at all, something to stay far away from.
We just have a minute now before the break. I want to just touch on interest rates. Interest rates really can hurt us a lot in this case that we've been talking about, but interest rate can help us if we're making interest work for us in terms of investment. So in 30 seconds, tell us a little bit about interest rates, the plus and minus.
Okay, compound interest is when interest grows on the principal plus the interest. So when a person borrows money or charges on a credit card, that interest is reflected in an average daily balance. So every day that a consumer carries that debt, the interest is compounding. The only way to stop that is to pay that debt off completely.
Okay, on that note, we're going to come back after the break and talk about the positive side of money. And stay with us. When we come back, we'll talk about investing and the future. Stay tuned.
Should your company buy or sell? Expand or not? Relocate? Or simply stay the same? If you'd like to examine past and present predictions, integrating finances and people, and make future predictions based on all that information, a career in economics is for you. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, and my guest today is Aleta Ostlund. Now, Aleta, before the break, we were talking about all the negative things and negative behaviors that people engage in that get themselves into a lot of trouble financially. And extricating themselves from that can be difficult, but it can be done. So we've resolved that.
Yes.
Okay, now let's talk about the sunny side of life and investing in particular. So we've got everything taken care of, we've managed our budget, we have extra money, we can now start investing. We want to think about the future and how to prepare for retirement. And let's say we've started early and we have 30 years to work with. What should we be in? Well, first of all, we should talk about interest, because we talked about before the break how interest can really hurt us if it's working against us.
Right.
But by the same token, compound interest working for us can be a great advantage.
Yes.
Maybe talk about that first.
Well, compound interest has been known to be called the seventh wonder of the world. Albert Einstein has been quoted that he sees great power in compound interest because of the fact that the interest is like a snowball effect, the interest growing on the principal and interest earning on interest. So with time on somebody's side, that snowball is going down, let's say, a bigger mountain. So if a student here at Cal State Long Beach starts investing right when they get a job, you can track that money and see that even $25, a week could end up being about $1 million by the time they retire. Time is essential when it comes to compound interest.
All right, and so that leads into the whole idea of investing and planning for the future, as I started to talk about before I realized we need to discuss interest and compound interest first. So, all right, I know that I'm going to get compounded interest if I start now and I start investing, and for 20 to 30 years it's going to add up. Okay, what should I be thinking about in terms of investments? Where can I get the best return on that money that I'm going to be investing now on a regular basis?
That's a great question, and it really depends on what people's goals are and their budget. And when they do sit down to do their budget, and let's say they have been able to pay off some of those debts, they really need to look at how much they're going to save per month and for which goal. Retirement planning, people need to understand that that money is going to be locked away until they're 59 and a half or older. Whereas if they have other goals, let's say to buy a home or children's college, you would need to allocate the correct investment to match that goal along with the time horizon. When you do have 20, 30 years on your side, such as retirement, you would really want to maximize your tax advantage savings options through pension plans and qualified plans like an IRA if you don't have a pension plan through your work. But for somebody who's looking to buy a home or their college, their child is going to go to college within 10 years, mutual funds would be a great place to look.
Okay, and if we have a lot of time to work with, we can be more aggressive in the way we invest. And what does that mean, being more aggressive?
Well, there's a kind of rule of thumb in financial planning that if you take the number 100 and subtract somebody's age, the difference would be invested more aggressively. Then the opposite would be invested a little bit more moderately or securely. So if you take a 40-year-old, 60% would be invested more in the stock market and more aggressive types of investments. 40% would be maybe in some income or bond type funds. But if you take a 65-year-old, 65% should be invested more securely, and 35% would be still trying to achieve some growth.
So really it depends on how much time you have in your horizon. So if we
there always needs to be diversification. And you may have heard the phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's a popular saying. With your money, you don't want to have all your money in the stock market or all your money tied up in real estate or all your money under your mattress either. There is risk everywhere. You can't avoid all risk. Even for people who are afraid of the market, if they were to put $10,000 into, let's say, a 10-year T-bill, we think of T-bills as being very safe. They're very low interest producing investments. However, there's interest rate risk, there's inflation risk. The market could go up, rates could go up, and their money's tied in this very low producing, 3% T-bill.
Right. So when we talk about being aggressive or being conservative, again, it depends on how much money you have available, how much time you have, and the whole range of your portfolio. And as we talk about the stock market, and that is considered, it can be a very aggressive way of investing, and depending upon how you play the stock market.
Right.
But people say they don't want to invest in the stock market because they're afraid it's going to go down. It's been historically very high over the last several years, and people are concerned that it's going to drop. Of course it's going to drop.
Sure.
It always has a correction.
It always has, yes.
But if you have a long-term outlook, you're still going to come out ahead, even if today's stocks go down, because if you set up a plan of continuous investment over time, automatic continuous investment, you're going to be ahead. Explain why that would be the case.
Dave, the first step for people is to create that budget and to make a commitment long-term to commit to $300 every month to saving. So if a person is going to put, let's say, $200 into their 401k plan or their IRA plan, they are going to pick what type of underlying investment goes into that plan. So more than likely it will be mutual funds. And that each mutual fund share is connected to a value. And that value does go up and down on a daily basis. And people need to understand that. But keep your eye on your long-term goal. If you have 30, 40 years here, you need to be comfortable with those fluctuations. Because if your $200 is buying a share at, let's say, $20 per share, then for every $100, that person gets 5 shares. Well, when that share goes up, people applaud and they're happy. However, it goes up to $25, now you only got 4 shares. On the reverse, when it plummets down to, let's say, $10 a share, there's all this panic. But wait a minute, you're now getting 10 shares per $100. You got it half price. It was on clearance, basically, right? So as time goes on, as your 30 years progresses, you're putting that money in. Electronic fund transfer is what they're all doing. Every paycheck, that money's going into your fund, it's buying shares. So at the end of the day, when you finally are ready to use your money, you're going to have a lot of shares, and whatever the value is on that day, that's going to be the price per value as you start to take it out to live on in retirement.
So you're not losing by investing in a stock that happens to be going down.
It's
the dollar cost
averaging,
average.
is what it's called. Yes.
Right.
And it's actually a really smart way to invest over a long period of time.
So it's either high value per share and a limited number of shares, or a lower
Correct.
dollar value for each share, but lots of shares. And
Correct.
so it's all going to work out.
It's all going to work out.
Okay, well, let's talk about real estate, because a lot of folks say, well, real estate is really where the action is. And there are a lot of programs on television now that
Yes,
involve
a lot of
house
house
flipping.
yes.
And it looks exciting, it looks
Right,
dramatic, it looks
right.
like fun to a lot of
Right,
people.
right.
And, you know, it can backfire, though, if you
Sure.
don't know what you're doing.
Sure, it's a lot of hard physical work, and it looks like fun to some people, but not to others. And it can be a little scary because some people aren't versed in how to buy real estate. Not everybody has a real estate license. But what I can say is, when you invest your money, you do need to educate yourself on your investment. If somebody wants to study the stock market, they can educate themselves. Same way with real estate. Most realtors are selling in, let's say, 10 neighborhoods. Whereas a person, if they want to buy a piece of rental property or want to buy their first home, they really need to become an expert in that neighborhood. Find your neighborhood. Once you've decided, okay, Long Beach is my neighborhood, I want to buy a home here, you can study the values of all the homes in the area based on the price per square foot. And, you know, there's going to be some fluctuations there based on the condition of the home. Does it have a pool? You know, what type of upgrades does it have? But really become an expert and understand the price per square foot in that area. And again, this is tied to your FICO score. Rates are really low right now on loans, but it's going to be connected to your credit. If you have good credit, you're going to be able to qualify for a good loan. If you're a first-time home buyer, there's still a lot of opportunity there. First-time home buyers only need to put down 3.5%, and they can get a decent loan.
So probably not the best idea to invest in coastal California with your first real estate investment. Maybe go further inland. Look for something that is in a lower price range.
Sure.
In terms of making that investment.
It depends on how much people save. If you can save and have 20% down, you'll avoid some of the private mortgage insurance and some of those other, you know, expenses that banks will tap on to the loan.
So let's talk about house flipping versus being a landlord for
Okay.
a longer period of time. Is it better to flip the house and make the big profit up front, or is it better to have a property that's going to, over time, increase in value? Meanwhile, you're collecting rent. Hopefully, you actually get some positive cash flow out of that. What's the better strategy?
Again, there's a lot of room for creativity with real estate, and there's a lot of different ways you can go. But when somebody buys a stock, all of their money is in the value of the stock. So the difference with real estate is you're putting 20% down, or in case of first-time home buyers, 3.5% down. If it's a rental property, not only do you collect the rent based on the total value of the purchase price, but hopefully you also have appreciation in the value of the home. And if you ask most retirees in America today what their best investment was or where they made the most of their money, almost all of them will say real estate. They will say, I bought this home, you know, back in the 20s for $20,000 and now it's worth $300,000. There's a lot of opportunity in real estate for appreciation. And for people who are buying undervalued properties that have maybe been abused or in bad areas of town, there is a lot of opportunity there to fix the home up and to capture rental income. My husband and I have actually had a lot of success with buying the ugliest house on the street, so to say, fixing it up and putting it on some of the vacation rental websites where you're actually getting a price per night to rent the home. And we have found that you can collect much more rent that way versus having a full-time 30-day, tenant, long-term tenant.
So you're talking about that creativity and that flexibility
Sure.
when you go into real estate investing.
Sure.
We're starting to run out of time again. Unfortunately, time really flies when we're having these conversations. But if we're talking about another kind of real estate investment, there's the real estate investment trust process.
Yeah.
Commonly referred to as a REIT.
A REIT. It's
what,
very,
yeah, what
it
is a REIT?
very similar to a mutual fund. If people have confidence in the real estate market, a money manager, just like a mutual fund money manager, would actually buy portfolios of either residential homes, commercial, retail, industrial properties, and pool money together from people that are interested in combining this. And you can actually put a REIT inside a pension plan. And one thing I didn't mention is that people, for those long-term goals such as retirement, really do need to be looking at their pension plan opportunities first, because most Americans are paying a combined income tax of, let's say, 30%. So by putting $1 in your 401k plan, you're immediately making a 30% return. And most employers are offering a match. Let's say 50% match for every $1 that person puts in, up to 6% of the income. If those people aren't participating in a pension plan that has a match, they're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Well, we have run out of time, but
Okay.
I've got 30 seconds left. What is the point of investing long term? What is the end goal for our investing?
I think the end goal for most Americans is to live in security in retirement and not be a burden to their families. I don't think most people will say, I want to get rich and leave a legacy. I think they want to have a comfortable, secure life, to have the ability to make financial choices in retirement, and leaving money to the heirs, that's just a bonus.
And on that note, we're going to have to bring the program to a close. But thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Talking Points. Please join us again soon for the next episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.